Hey, Brian.
Hey Carl, how are you?
I'm well. How are you today? How was Houston?
I'm doing well. It was great. It was great. Fun time. Long day, but saw lots of great things. Yeah.
Good. I'm glad. It was a week two contest.
Is
Hey,
that
listen, did you find that there was a common comment that you made throughout the day, one or two?
yeah, there are a couple. One comment that I made a lot was just on the strong production value that I saw from a lot of groups. I was really impressed, just seeing how much planning had been done. And with it being kind of an early season regional, there were a lot of groups out with, the full on costuming and set design and floor and flags. I know that not everyone's there
Yeah.
this early, but it was very clear that most groups had put a lot of thought behind that.
Yeah.
So they had done their homework and their preparation to be able to come out with a kind of fully realized idea in terms of just the visual package and what we were seeing.
That's great.
Um,
Texas is one of those areas that usually is really early on that. I'm always surprised. I always think they keep the costume companies in business in those off months because they're so early.
yeah, for sure, and I mean, and that was really evident at this regional there.
Good.
Um, I also found that I was talking a lot about connectivity. So in a lot of the groups, I was noticing that they had really a really big range of skills that they were exploring, and especially in terms of tosses and kind of those vertical moments. But not all the groups were taking advantage of how they were like connecting all of those ideas. So I found myself talking a lot about how we were getting in and out of those tosses and those vertical moments, especially when they came from like solo or small group efforts. So getting into a solo and how we kind of connect that event with what's happening elsewhere on the floor, or just kind of from the like lyrical line, how we were flowing in and out of those moments. Um, One thing that I noticed was a good bit of kind of like waiting for the toss to happen, getting set at flat and waiting and dipping. And especially with those solo performers or those kind of smaller groups that you can tell that they are some of the more advanced members of that group. I feel like they could, explore a little bit more getting them in and out of those moments.
God, Brian, I would highlight that in big, giant, bold, all caps and yellow. And I totally see that. And it's been kind of a curse that we've had as we've expanded our abilities in those
Mhm.
younger classes. But I'm guessing, and I'm kind of working on our recent history. My guess is you probably saw that to a degree or to different degrees in all classes.
I did. Yeah, I kind of saw it across the board. And like you said, in varying degrees. But yeah, pretty much across the board from regional A up.
Yeah.
Another thing that I noticed that was a common thing that I talked about last weekend was just how we use the performers on the sides. So when performers are exiting or entering or transitioning to a new piece of equipment, one thing that I found that I was just suggesting was just considering how to make their transition part of the design of the program. And to also just look at their proximity to where the focus is in the floor. At times, I was a bit distracted by the transition on the side or by that performer that was just kneeling and waiting to come in because they were in such close proximity to where the focus, where my eye had been led in the floor, or where kind of that primary voice was being carried around the floor. So I did notice that I was just trying to make some suggestions and point out places where I felt that it was those performers were either distracting or taking away from what I felt like could be a really strong moment. And also, depending on how long, like how much time those performers were spending on, I'll call it the sidelines, maybe finding a way to choreograph or sculpt those performers in a way that it was adding to the program versus, like I said, becoming kind of a detriment or a distraction
Yeah.
to all the great things that were happening around the floor.
We're so used to hiding behind marimbas that we forget when marimbas aren't there that we don't get to hide. The vocabularies with the regional A's and the A's are almost always so similar. And Shirley Whitcomb, my predecessor, would always kind of say, well, all cats are gray in the night when she was talking about the A class, because so many of the available choices to the designers and choreographers is based primarily on the point of development of the performers. And so I think the initial response from the designer and the choreographer or the creative team is that it limits choices. I think in your past, I've always seen you find interesting ways to invent or contextualize in a way that's unexpected and create, even out of simpler skills, if you will, a way to kind of create a fresh context. I've seen you do this with some of your younger groups that you work with. First of all, I'm going to work on the assumption that that's still available to the A's, even though those choices aren't necessarily being made. And I see that you're proof of the ability of that. Do you have any words on ways to kind of create that for the A's and help them stand out in terms of vocabulary so they don't feel like there's such sameness from them and their own competitors?
I think for me, I try to approach, especially with the A's, um, my design process from two kind of perspectives. One is, what helps um, serve the music, the soundtrack, and how does the soundtrack serve the show as well. And so sometimes in those moments, I think that ways that I've tried to stand out, not that I've always been successful, is trying to find a unique way of interpreting the music. So where what may feel expected in a moment, where a toss or a unison moment from the group, how can I maybe interpret that in a way that still picks up musicality or still advances the program and like the overall development, but maybe is catches the viewer off guard. Um, so I think that a lot of times, personally, I especially with A guards, um, I try to ask myself, like, is a toss necessary here? Is there something that would get this across more than a toss right now? And then I think the other thing is just identity. Identity in terms of like, what do I want to leave the audience with when they walk away from this program? Like that guard did that show about blank, and that there was at least some kind of strong hold in what the show communicated.
Yeah.
And so sometimes that may have been, I guess the reason I say that is sometimes I may have gone with more of an emotional hook, or maybe it was more of an aesthetic hook that made it stand out. Just because to me, maybe that one little nugget is what the show felt that it encompassed.
And it leads me to a conversation I've been having about, and it's different in different classes, but the need to establish vocabulary and then a choreographic stylistic identity, and the concept that establishing or building vocabulary is a product of the choreography, but the choreography is not always expanded by simply building vocabulary. I mean, you discuss the difference that you have a larger eye and that the vocabulary or the choreographic choice can be motivated by different things. And I think when people think primarily about building vocabulary, they don't always consider that other option. And it's the choreographic qualities that do consider, a broader use of space and the audio environment and the things that you talked about and how it has an expressive aspect also is what translates and gets it up into design especially. And then effect appreciates kind of both of them, in those big dynamic moments and the big individual efforts, they get to credit those. But those are things we came out of COVID and everybody having that in their holster. They're all able to do that. So it's no longer something that even though people think that it doesn't really set a lot of groups aside because they think they've got this one big giant skill that nobody else has. Because if they'd sit in the gym, they'd see that everybody's got one of those now.
Yeah, totally. I mean, if I just think back to this past weekend, the things that are left in my mind, the moments from the different groups weren't necessarily skill based, but they
Yeah.
were moment based. Like what served that moment, or what had that impact or that effect on me. And sometimes, like I said, it was an expressive or an emotional hook. Maybe it was, simply a really cool or unique staging choice. But while I remember a lot of the skills, those aren't the things that stayed with me, I guess.
Yeah, your observations are so spot on to identifying, how choreographic choice resonates. Did you find, especially in the A's and the regional A's, that there were compatibility issues? We struggled with that for so many years, where designers and choreographers were not necessarily considerate to the performer's abilities or even sensibilities, if you will, to kind of cater to them and customize their approach. And I think ultimately we're starting to grow out of that. Did you find that as a problem in that region?
I wouldn't say problem, but I did notice that there was, the that was an occurrence at times.
Yeah.
I did notice that there were some units that, at the end of the program, I was left with this feeling of, man, I feel like if there were one or two, three or four less things in there, or a couple of those things were just achieved a bit stronger, then the whole program would have had a different effect. The impact of the performance, I think, would have landed differently had there just been a few of those, higher range skills. Some of those moments that I could tell that the choreographer of the group was going, really going for that, big virtuosic moment or skill that maybe didn't land. And yeah, I feel like at times we were reaching for something just to maybe get that vocabulary. We were just
Yeah.
trying to reach that range of vocabulary. And I really just wanted, I guess in that moment, I felt that more achievement, achievement as an effect would have left me with a greater effect in that. I would say that if I were talking back and isolating the regional A's, I was surprised to see some of the skills and the range of things that the regional A's were attempting. I do think that some of the things that separated those groups were the ones that were really their training reflected what they were attempting in the show.
Yeah. I think too, and I'm going to project into the other classes. So I'm going to say instead of ask, my guess is it probably impacted placement ranking also, especially early season. Did you get a sense that it's, as you moved up in the classes, and again, I'm not sure what you saw in open, but as you look at that in A's, that you saw that incompatibility or that kind of disconnect between written choice and ability and sensibility of performers? Did you get a sense that, especially early, it manifests into potential loss of ranking or placement, that it shifted other people around?
I can't say for certain for every group, but I do think so. I do think that, maybe some of those groups that were kind of on the bubble,
Yeah.
that was maybe determined by the compatibility of the kids to the program.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's so key in that A and regional A class is
Mhm.
it drives so many of the judges' choices. And I'm happy to see that you had an observation that kind of feeds into that. Hey, so I have followed your and Emma's work for so many, many years through, and you have such an interesting creative evolutionary pathway, the two of you as a team, but also as individuals. And I was wondering if you could speak to any moment in your earlier creative life, looking back, that kind of propelled you in through the classes that maybe you could, share, that may open up some eyes and turn on some light bulbs for other people.
Maybe not one moment, but I'll talk about a few things.
That's good.
I think one, and I wish that I could credit them, but someone years back, I remember really saying that after, they sit as either as a judge or a spectator, they sit in the gym for hours on end. That the character, the identity of of a show, especially in the A classes, can either make you memorable or forgettable. And so, that has stayed with me. And I think that moment I started in the planning process, I started asking myself, I could make a a sound solid show, but is it a show that's going to be memorable and that's going to stay with the viewer for a period of time? So not to be redundant with what I was saying earlier, but I think that right there, and just thinking about like, is it memorable? Is it something that the judging panel is going to remember when they're going back at the at the end of their process? Changed a lot about the way that I was approaching the design or the planning process for the shows. I would also say that I started looking at and allowing myself to be impacted or influenced by art outside of our activity, being more aware of what choreographers in the dance world are doing and what artists are doing and what what's being created in other modalities of art, just because I think that it helps me express myself more creatively. It allows me to consider other ways of thinking or approaching, or even just starting the discussion about show design. So I think that those two things, and I say outside of the art, but also within, watching other successful programs and watching what other colleagues and competitors, if we want to use that term, are doing in the activity, and seeing the trends and seeing how I can create a voice for myself, and how Emma and I can work together to create our voice. So I think that just being observant to what's going on outside of myself has allowed me to open up and kind of unlock a little more of my own creativity.
Well, Brian, I've been a huge fan of yours for many, many years, and your observations are going to be hugely valuable to so many people. And I'm amazed at your ability to self-reflect and to turn it into, the work that you've created. So thanks again for taking the time, Brian.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. It was fantastic to be in Houston and to be able to see them and to be able to talk with you. So thank you for the opportunity.
You're the best, Brian. Have a good one. I appreciate it.